Welcome to Michael's Record Collection. I'm very happy to have with me a very special guest for this episode, Gil Moore, drummer and co-lead vocalist for Triumph. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Nice being here, Michael.
Gil, I want to congratulate you on being inducted to the Heavy Metal Hall of Fame.
Thanks. That was a real honor for us too. There's a lot of great names in there, and we were happy to be alongside them and honored.
I wondered if you had always considered Triumph to be a heavy metal band, considering that you've always had this a very strong blues and progressive rock, and even at times classical elements to your music.
Well, that's a good question. Our very first song that we wrote as an original, which is called "What's Another Day of Rock and Roll," it's got a lyric in it that says "blasting heavy metal right across the land." So I must admit, there must have been something in our heads at the time about that notion. I mean, the expression heavy metal was very, very new at that time. It was just something that, maybe within the last 12 months, I'm going to say, when Triumph started, even was a category, if you will. But as you said, Mike and I were bluesmen, and many of the bands that are considered heavy metal, if you look at Led Zeppelin maybe, or the Yardbirds as anchors, in the genre, the Rolling Stones, they all fed off the same blues artists, the Howlin' Wolves of this world, and so on, that Mike and I did. Now, Rick, to your point, completely different. His background was in progressive rock and a little bit of classical, so more along the Ritchie Blackmore lineage, and yet, if you listen to Deep Purple, one of my favorite bands, I would throw the question back to you: are they heavy metal?
Yeah, yeah, it's
Same situation with Ritchie playing, things that were, say, alternative guitar parts, you might say, in a band that would otherwise perhaps be classified strictly as heavy metal.
Mhm. Yeah, it's I'm glad you brought that up, that it's in your lyrics, because it sounds like you declared yourselves right from the beginning there.
Yeah, I think that, we didn't have a lot of preconceived notions. We were just trying to write songs, and we were trying to use whatever talent, each one of us had in the most effective way, and be sympathetic, to each other's influences. So I think that's why most of the songs that have bluesy melodies, I ended up singing them. Most of the more, the major chord songs and so on tended to
Mhm.
be songs that Rick sang. But I think maybe, it turned out to be a pretty good combination, because it made us different than, I haven't had anybody say to me, "Oh, you guys were identical to Boom," whoever that would be. I've never really had a Triumph comparison, other than to Rush. But the comparison to Rush is really about the fact that we're three-piece and we're from Toronto,
Mhm.
and Geddy and Rick both sing high. I don't think anybody's compared the music at all. So there's really been no, Triumph sounds exactly like, whoever, Thin Lizzy or Nazareth or Ted Nugent or, Blue Oyster Cult or Journey. There's never been any of that. We've always been all alone in the end zone with whatever our musical motif is. Well, love it or hate it, we were what we were, or
Yeah.
are what we are.
For sure, for sure. You had a documentary made, and it's called Triumph Rock and Roll Machine, and it premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival on September 10th. I was able to get a couple of screenings of that in, and I got to tell you, it's one of the better rock and roll documentaries that I've seen. Who came up with the idea? Was that from the band, or did Banger Films bring this to you, or where did that originate?
Well, it actually started with yours truly. I just had an idea based around the fact that I'd collected a lot of Triumph archives and had and piles of video, and it was just a kind of a dumb notion, like, oh, you know what, this stuff is just gonna all turn to dust if we don't do something with it. So I approached a buddy of mine at NBC Universal, Ron Suter, and I asked him if he would, if Universal would put money into it, and he immediately said yes, and he triggered a whole slew of investors like Bell Media and Rogers Media and Slate Music and so on. They just kind of all got behind us, and then at the very end, Live Nation stepped up when they heard about it and they put money into it. So Banger had lots of financial support to do what they wanted to do, but it just started from that simple idea, Michael. Like, I have a bunch of old tapes, and maybe it'll be a good idea to put something together to kind of say thank you to the fans and let them know that as Edgar Winter said, still I'm alive and well.
Yeah. Bringing up the fans is a good segue, because this documentary had an emotional impact beyond what a lot of these types of documentaries have, in that you had this fan event and you were filming the fans in their homes at times, and there were some that had some hard luck stories and had gone through some tough times, and it really brought a big emotional sort of a climax to the end of this documentary. I don't want to give too much away because I know people will want to watch it and I don't want to spoil it, but did this thing turn out how you hoped, or were there things left out you'd have liked in there, or did it surpass what you had even hoped?
I think it surpassed what I hoped. I mean, I'm the wrong guy to ask when it comes to, if you were in charge, what would have happened, because I keep fixing and fixing and fixing. I'm a perfectionist, so the thing would be 8 hours long and I'd still be in the edit bay. We had a lot of good laughs between Mark Ricciardelli, who did all the editing. He was a fabulous editor, and myself. We became really good buddies going through this. But I think, honestly, I think they surpassed anything that myself or Mike or Rick might have fashioned, and only because two reasons. One, because they have that independent lens, so they're looking at it with a completely clean slate, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I think that gives them perspective that the band doesn't have. And secondly, just their talent. Directing a film is not something for musicians that fancy themselves as film directors to do. Film directors are film directors for a reason. They the same reason musicians are musicians. They have a love for it. They spend most of their life, like in the case of Sam Dunn and Mark, they've devoted their lives to this, and they're very, very talented people. We also had Don Allen, who is our Triumph's video director for many years, was also a co-producer of the film, and Don provided some directorial insights along the way as well, because of his experience with the band. So I think we were very fortunate to be surrounded by people that were very talented. The two writers originally, Peter Goddard wrote the original treatment, and then Ralph Chapman actually wrote the screenplay. They did a terrific job in forming some of the narrative, I'll call it, as well. So all these people they really did a great job, much better than the band could have possibly done if it was left up to us. I think it'd still be in the edit bay, actually.
Gil, where is this? Is it already available to the public, or do you have a distribution channel set up? Is it going to be a Netflix thing, or?
Right now, it's strictly at the film festival stage. So I know that they're in negotiations right now with a film festival in the United States. I don't think I'm at liberty to say which one. Mm-hmm. And in Canada, the distribution, it is on Bell Media, which is the CTV national network. So it's I don't know what the equivalent would be in America. One of the big, ABC or CBS or something like that is carrying it in Canada. Mm-hmm. And so that's on free TV. And then they have Crave streaming, which again would be sort of the equivalent of Netflix up here. So in Canada, it's CTV network on free TV, and then streaming over Crave. I think they're going to hold it back because they're waiting to get a simultaneous, at least North American release, if not worldwide. And I know they're in negotiations with with several of the streamers in America. And also, I know they're talking about potentially cinema exposition. So both in Canada and the US. So that would be an interesting twist. I know there's some issues regarding COVID and so on. So some of those processes are a little hobbled at the moment, but it should be widely available in the United States is the ultimate end result, which I would expect we're talking first quarter next year.
That would be great. One of the things that stuck out to me was that there's some backstory of the band that is filled in with some it's your voices, but it's animated, and I got a kick out of the animations, and I wondered who did the animations, and were you happy with your likeness?
We had nothing to do with that. That's strictly the director's call, as I'll say it. And initially, all the rough cuts we saw, the animation would come, and there would be no animation. There'd be a black slide that said animation here. So we got used to watching the movie with these black slides that said animation here and not seeing the animation. And so we I know Mike, and I'm not so sure what Rick's feelings were. Mike and I were questioning it. We were like, I don't know about this, but it's because we were really never shown anything. And then when we finally were at the Toronto International Film Festival, and we were there for the screening, and we saw the complete movie with all the animation, all of a sudden we kind of had the aha experience, and we realized, you know what, this was a good call. I can tell you the directors told us the purpose of the animation is to cover spots in the narrative where there are no supporting photographs or video.
Right.
So that's the theoretical logistics behind it. But I also think it's a style. I think they made a conscious decision. Hey, we're going to use animation, and it's going to be part of the thread that we weave, because otherwise they could obviously just edit the film and change the narrative to suit the footage they had.
Yeah, I think they made a good choice. I think it worked really well, and did a good job of helping tell the story and fill in some of those gaps. So, and it's not a cheesy thing at all. You would think of animations, you think of cartoons, and you think maybe it's a little silly, but I thought it worked really well and helped tell the story. So they did a good job with that. Without spoiling much of the part of the documentary about the fan event, can you just tell me a little bit about how the fans were identified and chosen and invited to that event?
Yeah, I mean, it was an amazing thing. It was a Triumph fan who actually had made this request to me, had written me a long letter, and she's in the movie. They interviewed her, and coincidentally, this is a 1 in 10 million shot. She is a family member related to Ralph Chapman, the writer. So, which was a really, like I said, 1 in 10 million shot. She wrote me a letter asking me if a bunch of Triumph fans could come up from, mainly from the United States, but some from other parts of the world, just to tour Metalworks Studios. They just kind of wanted to come to the mothership and hang out. So in the process of telling her, yes, I would let that happen, I mentioned it to the film directors and Ralph, the writer. And the next thing we knew, we found out that Nancy was Ralph's cousin, and that they liked the idea so much they said, let's make it part of the film. So one thing led to another. To answer your question about how the fans were selected, Banger Films handled that by sort of putting it out there. I believe it was along the lines of, tell us why you want to be there and what's your connection to Triumph, something like that. And they got, of course, they only had 150 slots, so they had to cut down this big list, and they got all these submissions, and they went through every single one, and they handpicked the people, literally numbered from 1 to 150. And when they came on site, they literally had, a slot assigned, a number assigned, a seat assigned. It was like completely, you know, you'd think the military had run it.
Yeah, well, I think it did add a lot to the film, and it did reinforce that bond that Triumph always had with the fans. So I think it was a good move. I was surprised at how much stuff you had in storage at Metalworks in the attic. I would love to spend some time up there for a few hours.
Come up and visit us.
Yeah, I would love it. Let's talk a little bit about the history of the band. The band, you had kind of recruited Mike to play bass. He was working at a music studio, and you used to rent gear to him. But where did you first cross paths with Mike?
Well, it was really through a booking agency. Mike was pretty successful with his early bands. And when I say successful, we're talking about bands of kids, right? And Mike could get jobs. So Mike was a wheeler dealer, and he had a band. They had matching suits. That was a big deal changer there. If you were good enough to have matching suits, and he had glossy 8x10s. So kind of way ahead of my band. You know, my band was still, you know, we had the really blurry pictures, and we had like ragtag clothes that didn't make any sense. And all the agents would harass us saying, you know, can't you guys get matching suits? Can't you guys get good 8x10s? So Mike was, he was ahead of his time. I met him at our booking agency because some of his bands practiced there, and my bands practiced there. And so we ran into each other, and by happenstance, really. Mm-hmm. And then he went on and you know, as it shows in the movie, and is really no secret, you know, I had this little kid company that I started in my parents' basement, where I was making speaker cabinets and stuff, and, you know, sawing the wood myself, and, you know, soldering the speaker wires and all this kind of stuff. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew I had an interest in sound. And so that, yeah, we met that way too, because I started to rent speakers to his band, and, you know, a lot of them blew up. So I had to go back more often than not and deal with them about all the problems we were having. So yeah, he was pretty understanding about that, but we became buddies through the process. And you know, and then we started to play together, and we weren't serious really when we were playing together. It was more like a weekend band, and we'd kind of given up, both of us, on the brass ring very recently. So when we started to play together, that's what we would talk about, oh man, you know, this business, like, it's just so hard to have a band, and nobody, you know, you can't get a break. You know, the agents are really hard to get jobs from, and you know, everybody harasses you to play cover music and dress like an idiot. And, you know, it's just, you feel like you're up against the entire world, you know. And but we always had this sort of burning desire to, well, you know, at least I know you get it and I get it. If we could just find one more guy that would fit into this mold of this band that we can both see in our mind's eye, you know, maybe we could actually do something. So it just became a topic that we discussed more and more. And then finally one day we just decided, we were kind of looking at each other like, I know we're both crazy, but we're going to try this one more time, you know. Mm-hmm. And there was a few bands that kind of gave us some inspiration. Like ZZ Top gave us some inspiration. They were 3-piece. You know, they started in an unlikely spot, you know, down there in Texas and in Louisiana, and they got the ball rolling. The guys in Rush provided some inspiration. You know, Gene and Paul provided some inspiration. And you know, those like Rush, Kiss, and ZZ were just a hair before, just enough for Mike and I to sort of go, well, you know, if they can do it, we can do it. You know, it just was a very, very timely at that moment, I would say. And of course, the key was, can you get a guitar player? So we went through several guitar players before we were able to find Rick. Mm-hmm. And the guitar players previously, we could see we're going to get nowhere. And so we quickly sort of discarded those plans, and we said, no, we've got to find this dude who's the Jimi Hendrix of all guitar players that we have in our mind's eye. And we had a vision for who it would be. So it was kind of bizarre that we were able to, you know, track Rick down and find him. And then even crazier that we were able to talk him into quitting his band and coming with us.
Yeah. When did you, or how did you become first aware of Rick Emmett, and how many guitarists would you estimate you went through before you got to Rick?
We went through 3 or 4. Some of them just at the talking stage, several of them playing, have rehearsals. We found out about Rick through a local manager and booking agent. So booking agent first, manager second. So the agent said, "Oh, there's this guitar player. He's a new kid. He's like the youngest, the fastest gunslinger on the block. He's blowing everybody away." Sounded too good to be true. We tracked his manager down and we found out where he was playing. So Mike and I just barnstormed the bar he was playing. We just showed up, you know, and kind of, you know, commandeered him between sets and, you know, said, you know, we were full of baloney, but, you know, you kind of had to be. If you didn't believe in yourself, no one else would.
Yeah.
So we just told Rick, I mean, we're starting the greatest band in the world. We're just one member short. And, you know, he listened to our hype, you know, and I guess he, you know, he kind of said, well, these guys are either completely full of baloney or they know what they're doing. And then we had a jam, and then the music worked out. As soon as we started playing together, there was this, you know, you get these 2 bluesmen who, you know, probably more like the ZZ Top, you know, mold, I'll call it, of playing, or the Zeppelin style of playing. And then you have this guy who was, you know, like you said earlier, like classical, progressive, you know, like, you know, Kraftwerk or one of the other progressive bands from Europe. Yes, you know, for example, like that ilk, which was really not my cup of tea or Mike's cup of tea. We were definitely bluesmen. So it was an interesting combo when we started playing together, how the tone and the style meshed to form whatever the heck we became.
So the legend says that you showed Rick a check from Attic that was for $10,000 from the record company. Did that happen, and how was that check eventually spent?
Well, that's a true story. And Mike, as I said, he was got to give Mike credit for being ahead of the game. Like I said, if he figured out a way to have his suits for his band at glossy 8x10s when nobody else could have them, he also figured out a way to get Attic Records to give us a check to make an album or a single, I suppose, leading to an album when we didn't even have a guitar player. So there's the Mike Levine mystique. I don't know how to explain it any better than that, but Mike was he was pretty good. He still is.
It always seemed like you guys had a very sort of DIY approach to the band. You mentioned that you're a perfectionist, from building equipment to homemade pyro to management. You guys sort of took the reins of all of that stuff yourself, to researching and buying the Triumph torch. Where did that DIY attitude really come from?
It's really Mike and I feeding off each other, you know? So I think when you've got, you know, 2 guys that are, you know, you're at the very beginning stages of becoming an adult, you know, you're really just an adolescent. And if you get, you know, one person by themselves who might have some chutzpah, it's one thing. But if you start feeding off of each other, and I think there's a lot of bands, if you look, you know, whether it's, you know, your classic great, you know, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant, or Lennon and McCartney, or Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, or whatever, Gene and Paul, say what you will, Geddy and Alex, you know, I think it takes 2 sometimes in a band to feed off each other. All it would have taken was someone else to say, you guys are full of it, and kind of knock us off our horse. So we had to believe. Fortunately, when Rick came along, he kind of shrugged his shoulders and went, well, if you guys say that this is how it's going to go, and this is going to work, and you know what you're doing, it seems to me that you do. So Rick became a believer, and once he became a believer, it was almost cultish. He was converted, and we would joke with each other, like, I got to say, humor was the glue in Triumph. We were very serious about our music, but we were equally unserious about the whole rock star thing. We really wanted to have a good time, and we wanted people to have a good time, and we wanted to, move people in a positive direction. And so we fed off each other through those things. Humor being an anchor, wanting to be good on our instruments, be proficient musicians. We fed off that. We fed off the intensity of our rehearsals and our dedication to rehearsing. There was never anybody slacking off. We would rehearse even if one of us was sick or, tired or hungry, didn't matter, like was nose to the grindstone, because we had this attitude that it's us against the world, and nobody expects us to make it to the big time. And yeah, we've made it clear that that's what we're going to do. So we better work really hard to make sure it happens.
Yeah. You told me a little earlier about your hearing isn't what it once was. How much of that was the rock and roll? How much of it was the drumming? How much of it was the homemade pyro?
Yeah, the homemade pyro. I think the drums, and the fact that we had such a massive sound system is what did my ears in. Thank God for the audiologists of today and the magic of some of the hearing aid technology. Like, I don't know if you can see my hearing aids. They're like tiny little things. You can't even see them. Like, can you see that? Probably not.
No.
Yeah, they're basically invisible, but they're so high tech. The power that's inside them now, the ones that you sort of remember, those big ones that you can see that go sort of on the outside of the ear. Mm-hmm. Those things are now, you can put more power. It's just like an iPhone. You can put more power in a chip the size of your baby fingernail. So yeah, they're really quite tremendous. So I'm a lucky guy that that technology came along. And I know most of the drummers who played in similar bands had exactly the same problem. I know I talked to Neil Peart about his ears. They were as bad as mine. God rest his soul. And I know that many of the guitar players, Ted Nugent, I know has a lot of issues with deafness and so on. So yeah, it's something hopefully the younger musicians they're smarter than we were. They're using in-ear monitors or ear protection or something, but we're kind of like the generation of hockey players that had no teeth because we were wearing no mouth guards. Yeah. When we were in the NHL, there's no mouth guards, so you ended up losing your teeth. Well, same thing with hearing in rock bands in the 80s and 70s.
There you go. I always thought that one of the toughest things probably to do, or it seemed like one of the toughest things to do, was drumming and singing at the same time. And you've even said, I think in the documentary, I think you mentioned that you didn't like the listening to yourself sing. Was there ever a consideration to let Rick do all the singing when you brought him on board, or did you just like singing so you wanted to keep doing that?
No, I hated singing, and I did it because it was just sort of necessary. So in our very first rehearsals, Rick liked singing, and but what we realized is we wanted to have a theatrical performance, and so it necessitated a lot of stage movement for Mike and Rick. To create a lot of movement to go synchronize lights to and all the effects we were using and so on. So if Rick had to stay glued to a mic stand, you got to remember this was before they had those little headset mics, that are common nowadays and people run around with the microphone. You couldn't do that. So he would have been stuck at the mic stand. So it was kind of like, okay, over to you guys. And Mike's not much of a singer, so. And, he knew I could sing and Mike knew I could sing. So I just kind of got stuck with the job. And towards the end of our recording days, the last few records we made, I actually turned the corner on singing. I actually enjoyed it because I ended up getting a vocal coach that was really inspiring. It's too bad I didn't have, the same training early on that I received, later on, because I realized actually singing is actually a blast. It's not as much fun as drums, I don't think, but it's a fun activity. And if you get, slightly good at it, you want to get better, and you feel those little improvements. And so I ended up having some singers who were, I thought, fabulous and were kind of idols, just like I had drummers that I looked up to. And at the end of the day, yeah, I did like singing, but no, frankly, when we started, I was like, oh, please, do I have to do this?
Yeah. A lot of the Triumph albums have these little sort of showcases for Rick's intricate guitar work, these preludes and etudes and all of these like Suitcase Blues and things like that. They didn't quite always seem to fit in with the rest of the hard rock throughout the album. Were these your opportunity to give Rick a spotlight, or was it just, hey, we wrote this song and we're going to put it on the album?
I think it's a tough question to answer. I'm not sure what Rick's perspective would be. We always, Mike and I really loved those pieces that Rick wrote, and I don't even think Rick probably thought that some of it belonged in our performance. But back to our sort of theatrical approach, we saw this as a real great opportunity to change the mood in an arena, from, this, over the top bombastic rock and, soaring guitars and flashing lights to something, intricate and up close and personal. And so really change the mood and take the audience in a total different direction. So I think some of it, stemmed from our ambitions to be, cinematic in our approach, and not sort of simple fundamentalists.
Mm-hmm. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the fact that the 40th anniversary of Allied Forces box set just came out. Was that another one of your brainstorms? Where did the 40th anniversary box set sort of come from? What to include and all of that stuff?
Got to credit a guy named Andy Curran. Andy's a Torontonian, a very good musician in his own right. Worked with the guys in Rush quite a bit before working with us, and he came up with the design of the entire package and did I think a spectacular job.
Yes.
So he was hired by our label to do the work, but Andy's been a long time friend of mine here in Toronto. He's a great bass player, by the way. And boy, I think he did a smoking job on that box set. And again, if it was left up to us, I don't know that we would have come up with anything, nearly as unique. And it takes that lens, just like we were talking about with the directors in the film. Andy had his own lens into Triumph, so we could just let him loose in the archives at Metalworks and go, here's all this stuff. There's piles of it, but it's like almost like a landfill site. There's so much stuff. Like, where do you start? Whereas he was able to just walk over and see something and go, oh my God, look at this. I'm going to use this. And to me, it was insignificant, but to him, it was a gold mine. And now when I see the entire box set, I go, okay, I get it. Now I see that he could see something certainly I couldn't see. And he did a great job.
Might we see something similar for Never Surrender and Thunder 7 when those 40ths come around?
I would think so. It's until we did the first one, you kind of didn't know, being in the band, how it was going to turn out, how it would be received and so on. But having seen how phenomenally well received it was, and how cool the package is, as long as the label wants to do it, I know that Mike and Rick and I would be in favor of that for sure.
Mm-hmm. Technology-wise, obviously there's been a lot of strides in audio. There's 5.1. There's now this Dolby Atmos. Have there been any discussions on doing those types of releases with your music?
Well, as far as Atmos is concerned, we've had some discussions, but we haven't done anything about it yet. We've released high definition tracks previously, but I think Atmos is taking things to kind of a different level and a different audience, also a different backbone as far as technology is concerned. So I would hope that we would do that.
Yeah. Since this is Michael's record collection, I'm going to be a little bit selfish now and ask you about my favorite Triumph song, which is When the Lights Go Down. And I was curious as to, it starts with that great acoustic intro and ends with it also. And in the middle is just an all-out balls to the wall rocker. Did the song start with the acoustic part and then evolve from there, or was that added after the rocking part was written, or how did that come about?
After, because the slide guitar part is really sort of a bluesed up version of what I'm going to call the harder rock treatment of the rhythm guitars in the main body of the song. So I can't quite recall when we were writing the song. A lot of the times, some of the writing and producing and arrangement ideas would flow pretty freely between the three of us, among the three of us. So I can't quite recall at the moment, other than that it was the product of one of those, kind of writing, jamming, feeling our way through the groove types of sessions. But I thought it was quite effective. I love the dobro guitar, and it's one of my favorite parts. Kind of like in Fight the Good Fight, the recorder melody gives it the Celtic flair that you wouldn't get without the recorder.
Yeah. Triumph music, one of the hallmarks of some of your biggest songs is the positive messages in them. And some of the fans in the documentary talked about those messages. Hold on, magic power, fight the good fight, follow your heart, all of those things. Was that a conscious effort by the band to be that positive force and to not write about some of the trite kind of cliche, darker things that some of the other bands at the time were writing about?
I think that what would happen is we had our share of trite garbage, but we never liked it, and so, I think all musicians, when you're writing, you're trying to find, the divining rod is trying to take you somewhere. You're not sure where it's going, but you're following that divining rod and trying to get to the promised land. And for us, the positive messages, we seem to be good at it, Rick particularly, I'd give him the most credit in that regard. But what we started to notice is some of our fans would respond really well to the positive messages, and sometimes in an over-the-top way. I mean, I remember being backstage at a show we played in it was either Champaign or Peoria, Illinois, and this gal came backstage. She'd requested to meet us, and we got Bibles that were, gold embossed, and talking about, our positive lyrics, which is kind of an interesting anecdote that something like that would happen to a rock band. But I think more importantly, back to the documentary, you saw this when you screened it. Some of the fans that we had that, had some tough times along the way, you could see they really drew a lot of inspiration from some of these songs. And that's something that, as a band, I know I can speak for Rick and for Mike and say that we're all very proud of that. But, honestly, Michael, I think some of it almost happens by accident. Like I said, I think everybody that's written songs, they have their share of lyrics that they hate. So as a band, we're no different. We'd like to take the eraser out and go back to certain things and get rid of them. and look at the best work and go, gee whiz, why wasn't everything at this standard? But that's part of, I think, what drove us towards those sort of lyrical themes, was when we started to realize, gee, you know, maybe we've got a talent here that we should flex. And you know, some of the cheesier stuff, yeah, it's quicker and it's faster and so on. But I think a lot of bands regret some of their poorer lyrical content. And I think some of the bands that really stood the test of time, if you look at why they did, even if they're hard rock bands, it comes back to a lot of their lyrics. If you look at Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, as two prime examples, boy, they had some great lyrics. More than I really realized as a young musician, you know, learning their music, because you were focused on, as a drummer, you were focused on, you know, oh, John Bonham, listen to him, isn't he wonderful, you know? Or, you know, if you're a guitar player, listen to Jimmy Page. But at the end of the day, you might skip over the lyrics. You get a little later and a little deeper perspective, and then you go back and you go, gee, you know, some of those lyrics were great. And some of them, you know, the Zepp lyrics, for example, might be quite obtuse. And, you know, you kind of wonder at times, what the heck is he saying? But the more time allows you to have that, you know, look back perspective, I think the better, you know, some of those lyrics end up being. And certainly the Rolling Stones have always had, you know, some phenomenal lyrics. Although I would imagine if you ask Mick Jagger, he would say the same thing, that he has some lyrics he hates.
Yeah, probably so. Which Triumph album was it where you and Mike finally got that sound and got everything that you wanted, that you had envisioned when you started the band?
I think Allied Forces, because, you know, when we spent the time that we spent at Metalworks on that one, and we had more control over the outcome of the sound, you know, I know for me it was, for sure, that was like my feeling about you know, the sounds we got on all the instruments and so on. Technology was improving a little bit too, Michael. You got to remember, like, you know, records from the, you know, from the late 60s and the early 70s, and the even in the latter part of the 70s, moving into the 80s, like, the equipment was changing, the number of tracks you had was changing, the sound shaping tools that you had at your disposal were changing. So it was a pivotal time to get different tones and different treatments on instruments.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite Triumph album or a favorite Triumph song?
I don't think so, as far as an album is concerned. I like bits and pieces of all the albums, you know, for different reasons. You know, I like the song I Love for the Weekend on Progressions of Power, for example, because I feel like working people can relate to it, as everybody can relate to 5 o'clock on Friday. You know, I like Fight the Good Fight because I feel it says something that, yeah, the military related to it, I'm sure, as I've spoken to many men in uniform who love it. But I think you did not, you could be anybody and relate to those lyrics, and sports teams related to those lyrics. We had baseball teams relate to those lyrics. I love playing that song. You mentioned Lights Go Down. I mean, when the lights go down, what I liked about that tune is it reminded me of a Triumph concert, and I wrote those lyrics, and I wrote them thinking about being backstage, and you know, when those lights go down, and the fog and everything that we produced, you know, and the lyrics steaming like a witch's brew and all that stuff.
Yeah,
those were, you know, basically the feelings it was like to be backstage at a Triumph show, and the anticipation of, you know, our laser face coming out, and all the fans going crazy, and the laser beams going nuts, and, you know, all the mayhem that we were about to assault the audience with. So that, you know, has its way of energizing me when I hear that track. But I could go on, you know, about different tracks and different things that appeal, but I can't say, Michael, that there's one album where I go, oh yeah, it's all about this album. and I also can't say, I can't pick a song and go, it's all about this song. There were bits and pieces along the way that I thought had impact. And then again, there's other pieces of what our work that I'd love to take an eraser to.
Gil, before I let you go, I wanted to just kind of pick your brain on what your listening habits are like these days to music. Certainly when you were young and you were becoming a musician, you were inspired by songs, you had songs that moved you, and you would probably enjoyed, listening to music in your spare time. Do you do that these days? Do you take time out to listen to bands and listen to albums?
I don't listen as much as I could because, I've sort of moved on in my life to music education and concert production, like video production and so on, that I'm looking forward. I'm working on a mixed reality concept for Triumph to come back in mixed reality. So, that's a big focus of mine. And music education, Metalworks has developed, a platform to deliver free music education to kids worldwide on cell phones. It hasn't launched yet, but it's something that's, takes up a lot of my time. So really, Michael, music listening for me is kind of in bits and pieces. So I listen to I have friends that send me things to listen to that, can you listen to, my kid's record, or, Johnny's playing guitar. Can you listen to Johnny play guitar? And then it ranges to when I'm with my family, and I'm in the car, and I turn around to, if Holly, my daughter Holly's in the car, I just turn around and wink at her, and she knows that means ZZ Top, and boom, up comes, up comes On Bad I'm Nationwide, and I'm rocking. So I can never get enough of Led Zeppelin or Deep Purple. I could listen to those bands for 1,000 hours, but I love some of the great blues players, and even classic bands like Booker T and the MGs, and all the work that Steve Cropper did, and all the artists from Stax Volt Records. There's just about nothing there that doesn't, rev me up. The Sam and Daves and the Eddie Floyds and the, those artists. I just thought they were fabulous. Mm-hmm. And I see, that blues, motif that's woven forward into the Led Zeppelins and so on of a more modern era.
Yeah. Well, you got the 40th anniversary of Allied Forces set out. You've got obviously the documentary. What else? You mentioned this mixed reality Triumph thing. What else are you working on, Gil?
So the next thing coming down the pike is our buddy Mike Klink, who's one of the great record producers in the world. I guess he's most famous for all his work with Guns N' Roses, because he did just about all of their records. Mike is producing a Triumph tribute album right now, and he has just an amazing roster of the most fantastic musicians who are all big names in their own right, played with very famous bands, and or famous singers in famous bands, and they're doing a whole record of Triumph covers, but doing it their way. Don't want to let the cat out of the bag as to the list, but I can tell you it's a very star-studded list. The record's about half done. Again, we're probably looking at early next year, I would hope, in either the first or second quarter release. And I think the Triumph fans will just have a blast with that. Like, I've heard a couple of tracks already, and some of the treatments are similar to how Triumph treated the songs, but others are so different that it's almost unrecognizable that it's even the same song. And really fabulous. We got inspired with the number of bands that were doing Triumph covers just on their own, and just phenomenal covers all over YouTube. And we've seen how the music resonated with those artists, and for them to cover it, and then that I suppose bore the idea, maybe we should do this at another level. And Round Hill engaged Mike and said, let's do a Triumph tribute album that takes, you know, some of these songs and puts them with other musicians who have great ideas of their own and Mike's production techniques, and let's see where it leads. So it's a recreation. It'll be really fantastic, I think.
Is there a working title for this yet?
There is not.
Okay.
There is not. So if you think one up,
I'll fire it off to you.
Yeah, fire it off, you know, or any of your listeners.
Yeah, sounds great. Gil Moore of the legendary rock trio Triumph from Canada. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I wish you the best of luck with the tribute album and with all the other endeavors you got going on.
Thanks very much, Michael. You stay well during COVID, and you know, God bless all your fans. I hope that they're all safe too. And it was nice speaking with you. Thank you.